Welcome to the Habitat Podcast, the podcast for wildlife habitat management, hunting strategy, and land stewardship. And now, your host, Jared Van Hees.
Welcome to the Habitat Podcast.
I'm your host, Jared Van Hees, and we are here to become better habitat managers. What is going on, everybody? I hope you're having a great week so far here in February. Got your Valentine's Day gifts picked out for those special ones. We have a great episode for you here today. It is my good friend, Mr. Mark Kenyon from the Wired to Hunt podcast and MeatEater. Guys, this is a great podcast. We catch up with Mark. He's been on a couple episodes before, and we have him back here again today. What we're going to cover Mark's new book that's going to be out in about a year from now, but we're touching on some cool, I guess not so much cool, but different issues we're having across, the United States and the world with our wildlife and our habitat here currently. There's a bunch of stuff that I learned from this podcast that I had no idea about in terms of wildlife and fish and birds that are in jeopardy due to, how everybody's doing things these days. So we covered a bunch of that. Then we dive into Mark's habitat growth over the years, if you will. We talk about mistakes he's made. We talk about things he wishes he could have done different. He could go back in time. We talk about his food plotting coming up. We talk about herbicide, how to use that properly. A great podcast here. I really enjoyed it. And it's kind of an action-packed conversation for the amount of time. It was a great episode here. I urge you guys to go over there and check out Mark at the Wired to Hunt podcast. He's always been a very big inspiration for me. He's the reason I got into podcasting. His podcast, the very first one I listened to, I think was him and Dan Infalt way back when, maybe one of his first 10 or 20 episodes. And I've been hooked ever since. So Mark is a Michigan native, good guy, father, husband, and just proud to call him a friend. And we catch up here today on the Habitat Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you guys can hear that in the background, we have a northern Michigan fire in the fire pit right now. I just got up to the northern 70. We're going to hang out, got kind of a long weekend with the kids. They got some school off, and just relaxing. It's about 11 at night, and the fire is roaring. It was pretty crummy drive up, to be honest with you, but we're here. The fire's going, and getting this podcast out for you guys here this weekend. I want to tell everybody who's been leaving us good reviews on Apple, iTunes, and Spotify. I sent out a bunch of decals last week, like 12 or 15 of them. For those who do not have a decal from me yet, check your Facebook messenger messages on Messenger, or email me, info@habitatpodcast.com. It's going to be your best way. When you leave, I've said this many times before, but for those who are newer, when you leave a review on iTunes, it doesn't say Jared Van Hees. It says whatever username you may have made, 20 years ago when you got Facebook and Apple and iTunes for the first time. So it's kind of hard for me to tell who is who. But if you just reach out to me, message me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or email info@habitatpodcast.com. I'll be sure to get that decal out to you right away. We are very blessed with the listenership we have. I'm grateful for each and every one of you, and thank you guys who have left reviews. And thanks for those who send me your addresses so I can get them out. I really appreciate that. Guys, we're having a lot of fun right now with the new Vitalized Seed website and the new products we're launching at vitalizedseed.com. If you didn't catch us last week on the podcast prior to this one, we go kind of in depth on that. I know not everybody likes to listen to a whole podcast about food plot seed, but that's live right now. Nitro Boost is shipping. We are building more inventory. I know it's only February, but some guys are prepping and ahead of the game. I wish I had a little more of that in my genes these days. But guys, everything's available, vitalizedseed.com. I will be putting Nitro Boost in the ground in either late April or early May, whenever we have that soil temp. Up here at the 70, probably May. Before that, I will be frost seeding clover. So all that's available at vitalizeseed.com. Urge you to go check it out. Thank you so much for your support. Again, if you haven't been in the woods because of a lot of the cold weather recently, March is coming. Another great time to cut trees. I got a list of stuff I need to do at the 40. Calling my name. I know we cut a lot of trees. There's a lot of tops on the ground, but boy, I need to cut some more. And it is just, it's always on my list to get back out there and keep cutting. So I've been getting rid of some of the trunks to a local firewood guy. He's coming in and grabbing some of the trunks. I'm leaving the tops. That's always important. I always talk about that. And then again, I'm getting my tree orders in so I can plant within those tops when it comes to some cedars, some pines, some spruce, and then fruit trees. I probably am already behind. I need to get some of the oldest trees I can ordered. I'm going to order from Morse Nursery. We have a code Habitat 15 over there. And the Northern 70, I'm going to build a really cool orchard up here of all kinds of stuff for, the next generations of people in my family. So, guys, hope you're doing well. Hope you enjoy this great, I think it's President's Weekend. Be safe and sharpen those chains. Get out there. And again, we have Mr. Mark Kenyon from Wired to Hunt and MeatEater here on with us today. We'll be back next week with another great episode of the Habitat Podcast. Thanks so much for listening.
This podcast is brought to you by Latitude Outdoors. Guys, Latitude Outdoors is one of the top saddle hunting manufacturing companies in the world, here headquartered in Michigan. Guys, I've worked with Kevin, Alex, the guys over there at Latitude. I've been using their products for over 3 seasons here at Habitat Podcast. The first deer I shot was that first big buck on the 15 acres out of my Method 2 saddle. That buck, I shot him out of the saddle using the climbing sticks, the platform, everything to get up, and that saddle is just very versatile when selecting a tree. It's the first time I hunted that tree on the 15 acres. I climbed up that day and was able to make the shot and a follow-up shot on that buck in that saddle. Guys, the saddle is so easy to use. You literally strap it on like a seat belt, like a belt. It's all ropes. There's no metal components. There's no chinging and banging and clunking. I wrap it around, I step into it, I cinch it down, and I'm on my way out. I also use their Carbon Speed Series climbing sticks. I got those brand new this year. I've been using those all over bow hunting and gun hunting, from public land to private. Very lightweight, easy to carry, stackable sticks. I ended up putting cell strips on mine and using daisy chains. They compact very well, hang out of the bottom of my pack. And when I'm wearing the Method 2 saddle, I can easily pick any tree in the woods and hunt. Guys, if you're looking for a way to outfit your property without spending $200 per stand, like I'm gonna do on the new 40, I'm gonna prep a bunch of saddle trees and keep the deer guessing on where I'm sitting. They will not know my true stand location because I will not have one. Guys, saddles are very versatile. I urge you to check them out. Latitude Outdoors. Again, I've been using them for years and they are great products. Latitude Outdoors, thank you for supporting the Habitat Podcast. All right, guys, we are back. We have my friend, Mr. Mark Kenyon, once again on the Habitat Podcast. How you doing today, Mark?
I'm great, Jared. I appreciate you having me on. Appreciate the opportunity to talk deer, wildlife, wild places, habitat. It's my favorite stuff. So this is a good day.
All right. Well, you might fit the bill then for a solid interview. So sounds right. And I have a list of about most of those things to cover. So before we get too far into it, I want to hear a little bit about you for those who don't know who you are. You've been on here episode 67, episode 142. Do you guys want to learn about the hunting side of things, the back 40? Mark's been on twice, but Mark, let's hear about, who you are these days, what you're up to, and we'll keep it rolling.
Yeah. So to try to make a long story short, I host the Wired to Hunt podcast for MeatEater, which is largely a whitetail focused podcast with other stuff kind of on the sides. I host and do a bunch of films and TV shows for MeatEater, again, mostly whitetail focused. I write books. I've written one book so far about the history and future of our public lands, working on another book right now, kind of looking at the same kind of thing, but the past, present, and future of fish and wildlife across the country. So I'm deeply engaged with various conservation issues and organizations, and basically just want to do whatever I can to make sure that we've got wild places and wildlife to hunt, fish, and explore in. So yeah, that's kind of what my life revolves around and stuff I like to do.
Awesome. Well, your first book was great, and I expect the second
Thanks.
one sounds very interesting. So, how'd this idea birth?
Well, it's been an idea. I mean, the general topics have been on my mind for 15 plus years. But as I have, I guess, fallen deeper and deeper in love with hunting and fishing and the outdoors and big wild places and public lands and all that stuff, the more I have dove into those places literally, the more I have wanted to learn about what's going on with them and make sure that they're around for the future. And so that happened with public lands in that first book. I kind of was discovering that these places that I love, these national parks and national forests and these incredible places that I've gone hunting or fishing or backpacking, when I realized they were threatened in a lot of ways, I wanted to try to make sure that, if I didn't know about all that kind of stuff, I assumed there had to be a lot more folks out there like that who love these places too, but simply didn't realize what was happening. And so that was the idea for the first book. And a similar thing has been going on with the second book, in that, the wildlife that we encounter in the woods as hunters or anglers, right? They bring us so much life. They bring us so much joy and satisfaction. And the thing about it, though, is that unbeknownst to a lot of us, while white-tailed deer are doing pretty darn well, there's a whole bunch of other critters out there that are not. Across the world, we're experiencing what a lot of folks are calling, the sixth mass extinction. There's a level of species loss that hasn't been seen in millions of years, honestly, thousands of years on a kind of a charismatic megafauna scale. But basically, there's a lot of stuff that's not doing really well. And a lot of the species that we care about or things linked to them have been quickly disappearing off the face of the earth. And if we don't do something about it, if we don't get engaged and try to make sure we can be part of the solution, our kids or our grandkids might not be able to enjoy the same things that we do as hunters or anglers. And so this new book will be exploring that through the lens of a hunter angler, which I am. So there's a whole lot of books out there that kind of explore threats to fish and wildlife. The biodiversity crisis has kind of become kind of common vernacular for it. But there hasn't been a book that explores it through our lens, through the perspective of someone like you and I, who, appreciates and values wildlife, but we engage with it maybe differently than your typical environmentalist or person who might care about critters and stuff like that. So that's where the idea for the book came from. That's what I'm deep in the midst of working on right now, and excited to hopefully come back on the podcast maybe a year from now with the published book to get to talk about in more detail.
Awesome. That sounds, yeah, I'm sure we could do something like that. And I do have some questions kind of geared toward that part of the conversation. But first things first, speaking of things disappearing, where'd your mustache go?
Well, didn't you see that Super Bowl commercial the other night with the Pringles can? Like they all popped up in a Pringles can, and everyone's mustaches went flying away. That must have been what happened to me.
Oh goodness.
No,
yeah.
man, just was time for a change of look. My wife might have had a little bit of something to do with it. And as there's literally a small wooden sign next to my bed that says "Happy Wife, Happy Life." And I live by those words.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, you gave it a good go. I mean, you really did. So
yeah, it was a good couple of years.
For me, it's my only part of my facial hair that has remained 100% not gray. So when I go for the mustache, my wife is about on the same page. So got like a brownish orange mustache out there. Doesn't quite cut it.
Doesn't do it. Yeah, I think it's something that might come back at some point, but it'll likely be maybe a seasonal thing or, every once in a while kind of deal.
Maybe like a rut stash or something.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I digress. You mentioned a couple important things there, and you've been vocal about it in your media recently about some of the issues that we're facing. You mentioned some of the species that have been gone for thousands, millions of years and are, at risk right now. What are a couple of those?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some of the certain sexy animals that disappeared, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15,000 years ago. Things like, the Ice Age type animals, woolly mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, all that kind of stuff. So that was the last time we had a significant large scale loss of species. But when you zoom out even further, there was actually 5 other previous events in the history of the world in which there were mass losses of life. So not like hundreds of species, which is what we experienced 11 to 15,000 years ago, but thousands of species, up to 90, 95% of all the species on the planet. That's the level of extinction we experienced, 65 million years ago, 250 million years ago, et cetera, during these other extinction periods. Now, we are approaching a rate of species lost again that is at risk of getting to that level for the 6th time in the history of the earth. We're seeing on a level of there's something called defaunation, which is basically not the loss of an entire species, but a significant loss in the population of a species. So even though we may not have lost all of the tigers, for example, in the world, we've seen something like a 95% reduction in them. So they don't count as an extinction yet, but we've lost a massive amount of these animals. On average, a study came out recently that showed that on average, wildlife populations across the world since 1970 have been reduced by 72%. So you have this, epidemic across the planet, and even here in America, of, if not total extinction, lots of extirpations, which is like local extinctions, and then just a dramatic loss in life. So, here in America, I think great examples are like bobwhite quail, grouse, things like that used to be all over the place. I always heard these stories from my parents and uncles about the grouse hunting we used to have, folks down south talking about bobwhite quail. I think one of the numbers I saw is that quail populations have went down by 85%. Turkeys are a great example of a species that bounced back from a serious loss, 130 years ago. But now we're starting to hear more and more examples of states where those numbers are dropping once again. You can look at a number of fish species. Salmon are a huge and really unfortunate example. All across the West Coast, we're seeing salmon populations disappear. So there's unique populations of salmon to every different river system. And once those disappear from a given river, that's gone. Like there's like a almost a memory for these subpopulations to a specific home river system where they go and spawn and lay their eggs and then return. Well, they die, and then their progeny return back to the sea. Well, those are disappearing all across the West Coast. The Atlantic salmon on the east side of the country is almost completely gone now. There's hardly any left. On the west, at least, we still have what's happening up in Canada and Alaska. But there's, if you talk to folks that used to fish for salmon or steelhead in the Pacific Northwest or the coast of California, it is an absolute shell of its former self. So there's just a lot of examples of different species like that, are beloved by people, right? And I think that's the interesting thing with hunters and anglers is that we have a deep connection with the species that we pursue. And so it's something that's felt viscerally, I think. If you grew up loving the salmon fish in Oregon or California or parts of Washington, and now that just doesn't exist anymore, that's devastating. Caribou populations, I just recently saw the number across the world, and don't quote me on this exactly because I want to make sure I've got this number right, and I don't have it quite right, but I think I remember seeing 85% loss in caribou populations across the world right now. There's this crazy steep decline in the last 20 years that isn't really getting a lot of attention yet, but I think very soon we're going to be seeing some serious red flags raised. The Western Arctic caribou herd, which was at one point, maybe 25 years ago, up to almost 500,000 animals, is now below 200,000. So it's been more than halved in 20 years. There's been herds of that size in parts of Canada that are just gone. So these incredible phenomena of the wild world, these massive populations of charismatic animals are blinking out. And that is cause for concern for anybody who likes to hunt to feed their families, who likes to fish, have a good time out there, who just enjoys hiking around the woods and seeing wild creatures. Wild places, public lands, or your back 40, your hunting property, that land itself is really special, right? I mean, I know you enjoy being out there, working the ground, planting trees, you know, grabbing a handful of soil. Like that's tangible and special. But could you imagine if there were not animals out there alongside you on that landscape? Can you imagine how quiet, how lonely that would be without the buzzing bees, without the crickets, without all the bugs out there, pollinators, songbirds? All of these things are disappearing. 3 billion fewer birds now in North America than we had in 1970. We're losing these critters all around us, and we're just burying our heads in our phones and the news and forgetting that there's this wild, vibrant world outside that's slowly fading. And so this book is my attempt to bring attention to that and showcase how hunters and anglers have been in the past and once again can be a part of the solution.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of alarming facts right there, that I just even learned through this conversation. Um, I may already know the answer, I may not. Why is this happening? What's the general consensus of, or maybe the theme behind why this is happening?
Well, there's 5 or 6 kind of interconnected compounding sets of issues. Unfortunately, pretty much all of them are just related to us. That's the interesting thing about this mass extinction event is that the previous 5 were all related to natural phenomena, and this one is all related to humans. They're calling this, the Anthropocene, which is basically the era of human impact. We are we have a massive footprint on the landscape. We have a massive impact, with everything we do, right? We have transformed more than half of the world's landscape to our needs and desires, our homes, our businesses, our resource extraction, our farms, whatever it is. And so all of that brings a set of pressures on the landscape, on the environment, and on wildlife. And so the major pressure points, the major categories of issues impacting wildlife and that are causing, in one way or another, causing these impacts would be habitat loss, a lot of that through agriculture, pollution, climate change, invasive species, and actual human overharvest, overfishing, killing, poaching, that kind of stuff. So those big 5, I don't think I'm forgetting any. I'm pretty sure that I've got all those covered, are the big 5 buckets in which the many different specific ways that wildlife populations are disappearing, they fit into those buckets. In many cases, it's not just one of them. It's a combination of this thing plus this thing plus this thing. It's a death by 1,000 cuts for a lot of these critters.
Okay. Yeah, my guess was going to be the loss of habitat or lack of quality habitat out there, and then the expansion of the population, all that correlating at the same time or compounding. That makes
Yeah.
sense to me. How are you finding out about this stuff? Like if I'm Joe Blow here and working my private 40, how are you aware? How do I become more aware of outside of my little bubble?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's 2 answers. There's the answer of like how I'm becoming aware of this, and then there's the answer of how other people should become aware of it. Because the average person is not as crazy as I am to want to dive into the minutia of all these things, and I don't blame them for that. So I would recommend, for the average person, well, I'll say for myself, I have learned about all this by, devoting the last 15 plus years of my life to reading every single possible thing I can about this, to speaking with biologists and researchers and folks from managing agencies and landowners and land managers and hunters and anglers and all these folks out there on the landscape. Reading every peer-reviewed study I can get my hands on, reading every different governmental report, whatever it might be, trying to make sure that I've got a full suite of, reviewed, not standardized, legitimized data that explores what's happening. So that's how I've been trying to do this. But for the average person, I think that there's a fire hose of information out there that, is coming at you about so many different topics, right? And so you can become overwhelmed by the media. And if you're not, I guess I would say the easiest way to try to take all this in and to filter it is to lean on an organization or trusted source to be that filter for you. So in the case of like a listener of this podcast, I think organizations like the National Deer Association or the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership would be two really strong examples of an organization that not only can you get involved in, but simply sign up for their newsletter and follow their websites for updates from them on the most important relevant issues to you. So both NDA and TRCP do a really good job of sharing with their membership information related to wildlife management, population issues. And it's not always like in the case of NDA, yeah, a lot of it's deer related, but I know just recently they've been talking about monarch butterflies and the different biodiversity impacts related to deer and deer habitat and the types of landscapes that many of us whitetail hunters spend time on. And then the TRCP, which is the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, they're a little bit broader organization looking at hunting and fishing and habitat related issues across the country and really shining a light on all that kind of stuff. So they might be one of the better organizations for a hunter to keep tabs on, because they're going to send out a newsletter every week or two with updates related to this kind of stuff, giving you updates not just on the species that you hunt, but also these larger wildlife related issues. So those are a couple starting points to get tapped into, so that you're not, overwhelmed by the million different things coming out there related to the environment or climate or wildlife. But at the same time, making sure that you are aware of those key, most important things. And then you can dive deeper if there's something that's, of particular interest to you. That's how I started. And then it's just kind of grown from there, as you can see on my bookshelf.
Yes. Yeah, I like your Instagram post where you highlight some of the recent books you've read. You give a little synopsis on one or two or your favorite. It's always intriguing, and I think that we're all just in our world, in our projects with the speed of life these days. I'm 10 projects deep on what I need to be doing this weekend out on the property. Right? Is there anything that us private landowners can do to help play a role in some of the broader spectrum besides joining the organizations? I know we like to build better habitat. Is there anything that sticks out to you that might be a good step in the right direction for private landowners?
Man, so many. I think that private landowners, especially private land owning deer hunters like we are, represent one of the most massive opportunities to tackle this biodiversity crisis. Because there's a lot of people out there across the country who do care about wildlife, who watch the Netflix documentaries, they watch Planet Earth, they think, oh yeah, I want to save the butterflies. Yeah, I want to save the endangered box turtle or whatever it might be. They care, kind of, but they don't really know what to do or how to do it other than sign a petition or post something on social media. And don't get me wrong, it's good to do that stuff. But we as private landowners, we as deer hunters who understand some stuff about wildlife and who have the tools to improve habitat, we can actually do something like right now. And I know you are doing this, and I'm trying to do this, and there's a lot of listeners trying to do this. We can actually do things on the ground that make a difference. And the really cool thing is that many of the projects that will help deer and help you as a deer hunter, if you think about it, if you maybe make tiny tweaks or just be a little extra careful about certain things, they won't just help deer. They will also help many other species at risk. They will help, promote clean water. They will help generate clean air. They will help sequester carbon. They will help keep pollutants out of wetlands. There's all these different things that we can do as deer hunters and managers that are win-wins. So we can get our great deer hunting and we can make a real tangible difference when it comes to this set of challenges facing fish and wildlife. So, stuff like you talk about, using regenerative agriculture principles when planting your food plots, right? You've got a lot of great resources on that kind of stuff. It's such an easy win. It works great for deer hunting and food plots. It's also great for the soil. It's better for bug life and so many other things out there, right? Minimizing herbicide use, not overspraying and killing all the native plants out there that pollinators depend on, right? There's a simple thing we can do. Try to reduce our chemical use a little bit as best as we can while still achieving our management goals. But let's make sure that there's flowers out there for monarch butterflies. Let's make sure that there's some prairie habitat, grassland habitat out there for songbirds, for quail, for small mammals. Grassland habitat is one of the most dramatically reduced ecosystems across the world, especially here in the United States. And it's really needed. I mentioned a little bit earlier ago how songbirds across the United States, across North America, have declined dramatically over the last 50 years.
Have you ever been overwhelmed by the hundreds of food plot seed mixes out there? Well, you are not alone. and Vitalize Seed has developed a seed program that takes the guesswork out of food plotting. Vitalize Seed has 2 core mixes, the Nitro Boost and Carbon Load, to keep it simple. Nitro Boost is their spring-summer food plot mix, and Carbon Load is the fall plot mix, each having a diverse mix of over a dozen different seed types that are highly attractive to whitetail. Food plotting made simple, but it gets even better. Each mix provides necessary nutrients to the soil, making for better plots each season and saving you money by needing less Roundup and less fertilizer each season. The 1-2 system simplifies your food plots just how nature intended. Vitalize Seed. Make biology work for you. Order now at vitalizeseed.com.
Grassland species have been the most dramatically hit. I'm going to forget the exact number. I think it's something like grassland species have declined by 65% or something over those last 50 years. It's dramatic. So this is just an area where there's a lot of need, and it's in perfect alignment with what we're trying to do as hunters. Because, hey, what's my favorite kind of stuff to hunt for whitetails? It's CRP. It's tall, brushy, grassy stuff. Some wildflowers mixed in there, some tall grasses mixed in there. Like, that's great habitat for deer, great habitat for pheasants, great habitat for a whole host of species. And we have the know-how to do it, right? A lot of us have a tractor. A lot of us have, connections to get seeds for this kind of stuff. We know some of the tools needed to get this stuff on the ground. Prescribed fire. There's so many different things that we can do that we've been talking about for decades for deer. It's also the exact same kind of stuff, as long as we're being careful with some of it, that's also really good for all these types. So my recommendation to deer hunters would be to seek out sources that are helping you understand how to do deer management that's also really good wildlife management, which I know is something that you guys talk about here in the Habitat podcast. And I think it's one of the reasons you guys are highly recommended and should be. I think exploring these like slightly more holistic ideas for managing our land are the future of deer hunting management and of how we as hunters and anglers show the world that, we are a huge part of the solution and really make a real difference.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you there. And I think that mindset is shifting as time goes on here, at least beginning to, and the next 10 or 20 years is going to change more and more. So it's great to be on the front end of this and be aware. You mentioned a couple little things there that I often get questions about, like reducing herbicide use. When you're doing this on your farm, when Mark's doing this, what exactly are you doing a little bit different that maybe a beginner might not understand or not be aware of? I want to hear like a specific example or two that might benefit or behoove some of the things we're trying to impact here.
Yeah. So it's nothing earth shattering. It's not revolutionary, but it's trying to do a couple things. Number one, always following the label. So when I started using herbicides, I first thought, man, well, the more I put in this jug, the more I put in the sprayer tank, the better kill I'll get, the better this will be for my food plot. And I probably over applied chemicals, maybe to a dangerous amount early on when I first started dabbling with this kind of stuff. So number one, don't do that. Follow the label instructions as best as you possibly can, because that's going to help make sure that you are not over applying what is a poison on the landscape. Number two, making sure you're really careful about spray drift. And this is something that I have tried to get better and better at every year. And it's hard because, sometimes you have one day when you can get out there to do this work, when you've got to go spray your food plot, or you've got to go do your management efforts. And it's like, I have a Saturday. And what happens when that one Saturday you have to do it, there's a 25-mile-an-hour wind. That's not ideal. I should take a step back. Spray drift is this circumstance when you spray an herbicide off of your boom sprayer or the back of your ATV, whatever it is, and that herbicide that you're trying to apply to a targeted area drifts in the wind and kills non-target species. And so this is a really big deal on the agricultural scale, where you've got farmers using herbicides across, hundreds of millions of acres across the United States, and they're applying who knows how many gallons of herbicide. Hundreds of millions of gallons probably of herbicide. And in a lot of these cases, they're applying this, Roundup or whatever it might be, and it is drifting in the wind and it's hitting, adjacent prairie strips, adjacent fence rows, adjacent, fallow fields, and killing a lot of this other stuff. And a lot of this other stuff is the habitat that has historically supported pollinating insects, birds, all the other stuff, right? And like those plants support insects, and insects are the base of the food chain for birds, small mammals, game birds, all this other stuff. And it's like it's pyramid. All these things stack up. You can't point at anything on the landscape and look at it in isolation. They're all connected. So if you want to have good deer hunting, if you want to have healthy habitat for deer, you want to be thinking about everything else in this food chain. And it's not really a chain. It's more like a circle, circle of life, Lion King, right? It's all interconnected. Yeah. And so spray drift is a big issue across the country. And it can be an issue even on the micro of my little, 20 acres or 60 acres or whatever it is. So I try to make sure that if I'm going to spray, if I have to use spray, I'm going to do it when it's not windy. So I'm not knocking out anything else than I have to. I want to make sure that whatever adjacent wildflowers or grasses that are good, that are native, I want to keep those there. So that's a big thing. That's a very simple thing. Wait for the right days to do it, follow the label, and then simply minimize. So I've tried to use as little herbicide as possible. So by that, I mean, I've changed some of my management practices to reduce the number of times I have to spray. So when I first started food plotting, when I was just learning about these things, I would do two things a lot: spray a lot, and I would plow a lot. So I would spray, then I'd wait for it to die. I'd spray again. I'd wait for it to die. Maybe then I would try to, I was using very, rough equipment. I had like a little tiny groundhog ATV disc. I don't know if you ever saw one of those or used one of those.
That,
yep. Yeah. So I'd be using that, and then stuff would come back up again. I'd spray again. I don't know, I'd probably spray 3 or 4 times a year on some of these food plots, and then I'd be ripping them up with this little ATV 4-wheeler. So those two things right there, not great for soil and not great for all the surrounding plant life or microbial life as well. So now using your food plot seeds on a lot of my spots, I'm trying to apply this kind of rotational no plow food plot approach, in which I do still spray, but significantly less than I used to. I'm now spraying usually just one time. I'm doing a kill in just before my late summer planting, and I'm able to have a great food plot even with just that. And it's a food plot that's pretty dang good almost the entire year. So, learning about these regenerative agriculture approaches, looking into no plow, looking at ways to, I don't have a mechanical way to terminate. There are ways to do that too. I've used kind of like I've done the mow and throw type food plot approach. I've rented or paid people to come and help use no-till drills for me to get my plots in. I've tried a bunch of different things, and sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity. Sometimes it's a little bit more challenging to get started just because you might have the right equipment. But once you get it going, it ends up being a lot more efficient, I think. It's better for the surrounding landscape, and it leads to a great, product on the landscape. It still helps my deer hunting, but I also know that the area around it's healthier. And I can feel like I'm doing a little bit of my part.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, the way you were doing it in the beginning, it wasn't necessarily that it didn't work. I'm sure it worked fine. It's just, this is a more of a holistic mindset or nature friendly mindset way of doing things. Yeah. And let's not forget about the time it saves you, the money it saves you or whomever. And there's a lot of people that are looking to get away from the herbicides and everything else. They are so effective when used correctly, once a year, twice a year, that I get that. Are there any times where you've lost the battle to it and you've maybe had to revert back to a disking or anything like that? Or have you have it pretty streamlined now?
I'm trying to think here. I don't think I have had to disc anything in, I don't know, maybe 7 years. I mean, the closest I came to that, the closest I came to anything like that would have been maybe like 3 years ago when you actually came out and helped me. Where we had some weeds that got way out of control. And so you had a friend who had a tractor, and he was going to come in and try to help with that. And I'm trying to remember exactly what he ended up doing. He kind of scraped the top, I guess, was what I think he did.
Wet. Yeah.
We had to try to get rid of his. I think he was going to come and try like brush hog some stuff, and then try to just like scrape some of that thatch out of the way. Yep. And so it definitely was not like a chisel or a plow or anything like that, but there was like just a light kind of disruption of the surface, I guess.
Yep.
But other than that, honestly, since before the Back 40 project, so when I started the Back 40 project, which would have been, I guess that would have been 2019, and so it's 2025 now. So I guess, yeah, like 6 years or so, I guess I have not had to disc or do any kind of serious plowing of the soil. So I feel pretty good about that. I have, like I said, had some years where I had to do a little bit more than one application of herbicide. And again, like you said, it can be super effective in some situations. I'm not claiming to never use it, nor saying that you should never use it. I can just tell you personally, I'm trying to minimize it and trying to do it as responsibly as possible. But it is a tool that sometimes, can help you achieve important management goals, especially like removing non-native species. Dealing with grass is one place where I've been using herbicides still and trying to restore a native, diverse grassland structure on some spots. And the only way I've been able to do that is by using herbicide to get rid of some cool season grasses.
Yeah, and that's very smart. That's what you're gonna have to do there. Did Jerry ever come back and get his disc?
Still there.
No way.
Still there, man.
Yeah, I mean, you had so much thatch in that area we were trying to plant. It's all coming back to me now. And then it was wet. We're trying to remove some of that thatch layer by disturbing the ground just a little bit and getting you some seed to soil contact. Yeah, that's been a minute. I wondered if that was still there the other day.
Yeah. No, but it's looking good now.
It's a yard ornament.
It is a lawn ornament there. My I think Kyle Perry.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kyle. He came out last year and helped me drill the plots, and he pushed the disc at least off to the side, so it's now off the edge of the plot. And just a nice reminder of a good time I had with you a few years back.
Yeah, that was fun. You just mentioned a spot spraying, some cool season grasses, and again, timing can always be important on that. Spraying in the fall while those grasses are doing great. Tell me about that project you're working on. What are you seeing a bunch of? Maybe what's the landscape consist of? What are you targeting? Are you spot spraying? Are you broad spraying? How's that working?
Yeah. So on this place, I'm limited in that I don't own it. I have permission on it, and I have permission to make some habitat improvements as long as it's not impacting the crop fields with the farmers working. So basically what that leaves me with is like a few grassy fallow areas and a power line strip. And so historically I put some food plots in that power line strip in a couple places, but last year, as I was trying to think like more holistically, what can I do that can make a difference and help more than just deer? I want to help deer, but also everything else. And I can't do some major timber project. I can't do anything about the 60 acres of open fields. What can I do? And one of the big problem areas I saw was that a lot of that fallow area, a lot of that power line were cool season grasses that were worthless for wildlife. There was no food. There was very little cover. And I'm also, though, challenged in that there's not a ton I can do with it. I can't burn. That's one thing I can't do there. Okay. So as I was trying to think through, like, what could I do to kind of disrupt this and get these cool seasons out of here? It kind of came down to the fact that herbicides was probably the only tool I could use. So I started this last year. And you mentioned timing and timing being important. And I was not able to do the ideal timing of a fall spray. I talked to Craig Harper about this, though, and he said, hey, you can still achieve it with a spring spray. You just need to time when you're spraying it well, and then know you're going to have to continue to return to it for a year or two afterwards to continue managing. So I did this for the first time last spring. Basically waited until you had about 5 to 8 inches of new green growth in the spring of those cool season grasses. So keeping tabs on it, going out there, checking it, trying to see when I had that growth, and then spraying that, by the label when there's not a bunch of wind. So basically trying to kill the cool season grasses early on in their growth. And then that would leave space and leave opportunity for other grasses and native species to come up later in the year when they start growing, when it's a little bit warmer. And, just with one application in the early spring last year, I would say that, and this is not a technical quantified analysis, but I bet you, just going out there and looking at it after, 6 to 8 months, I would say 60% of the cool season grasses are gone. Like, wow. I would say it's the majority now is not those cool season grass species. I'm getting all sorts of different flowers, different grasses, different shrubby stuff, forbs, you name it. I can't remember the specifics right now, but I went out last summer in August, I think it was, and just in a few minutes with my, what's the app called? The Seek app. I think I was able to identify like 5 or 6 different native species, forbs and flowers out there that I'd never seen before, that I'd, ostensibly had to have been because the cool seasons weren't there choking it out. There used to be just this carpet of grass, of green grass that's, a couple feet tall. And that was all that was out there. And now I've got stuff that's up above my head, way over deer's head. You're seeing all sorts of butterflies and bugs and critters out there. I just saw 3 rooster pheasants out there the other day. Very cool to see them coming back, and I feel like this is helping.
Very cool. That's encouraging. I think that's what I wanted to hear, what exactly was coming up or kind of what it looked like when you were done. So that's great. I know I can't name every plant out there either, so those apps are super handy. One of the biggest mistakes you've made, would you say? You mentioned, a couple of the herbicide related ones. What other habitat management mistakes, or maybe one glaring one, going back in your 6, 7, 8 years, however long you've been on this piece here, did you make? And just it punches you right in the mouth every time you think about it.
Well, there's a lot. And I started working on habitat management related things. Would have been 2009. I think would have been my first year doing anything, 9 or 10. I tried my first food plot. And then 2011, I think, is when I started working on this particular property that you were with me on. Yep. So that's, 15 plus years on that particular property. And I've made every mistake in the book. I think 2 stand out. I think one was, what we've already been talking about, which is taking the narrow view of what's the easiest way to get deer food on the landscape. And so that's how I started for a lot of years. A lot of disking, a lot of monoculture food plots, and very kind of tunnel vision on just like, how do I get deer to come to this one spot so I can shoot them? And that was great. I mean, and when I say great, I mean, it worked. I saw deer, I built some tags, I put meat in the freezer, and I had fun. So it was good from that perspective. But as we've just described, what I've learned over the years is that I could have been doing so much more, and I could have kept the soil healthier, and I could have been able to keep more water on that ground and not have as much runoff and not have erosion issues and have healthier soil, healthier plants, healthier surrounding habitat, more wildlife. I could have had a lot more positive stuff going on. So that's one thing that, as we just discussed, I've learned about and started to change. I think another thing that I wish I had done, and this is something that I still haven't done. So this is me still not taking action on something I know I should take action on. But I wished that I had planted a bunch of trees when I started, because that's something I probably could do. And 15 years, I could have had some serious stuff right now, some serious fruit trees or oaks or, screening. That would have been amazing if I would have got started on that early on. And I haven't. I've just dropped the ball on that one. And then the third thing would be a more hunting specific thing, which is that early on in my habitat endeavors, I thought more and everywhere was better. And so I thought that if I can get a food plot anywhere, that'll help me. If I can make an improvement anywhere, that'll help me. And what I did was that I put some improvements, specifically food plots, but a couple spots, some like little hinge cut type deals. I put those in places where it was convenient to do it, not thinking about the ramifications from a hunting standpoint. So like the most glaring examples, there's a spot where I had an opening that was, it seemed like the obvious place to put a food plot. So the very first year I could do anything on this land, I got a buddy to come out and help me. We planted a food plot there. But excuse me, it also so happened to be right along like the only route I had to hunt much of the property. So I'd have to walk past it and walk out past it again when I left every time I hunted. And of course, as you know, everyone listening knows, I was spooking a whole lot of deer out of there before daylight in the morning and after daylight in the evening, hurting my hunting. So I was doing the thing, Jeff Sturgis kind of coined, at least in my mind, the idea of like the attract and repel effect. I was attracting deer to a spot and then repelling them from it with my presence. And so I quickly, maybe not quickly enough, but quickly recognized that and had to just get rid of some of those improvements, stop making improvements and understanding that in some places, not that you shouldn't improve it, but being careful with what kind of improvements you make in places. So now I've got areas where, hey, if I can make a timber stand improvement here that would just make it a healthier piece of timber, or maybe better for other things, this would be a great place. But I don't want this to be like a deer concentrator right along my path, right along my entry route or something like that. So that's something that I think a lot of hunters probably have experienced or will experience when they first get started with this stuff, because it's so tempting to want to attract any place I can get more deer. That's going to be good. But actually, you have to have safe places for your wind to blow. You have to have safe places to enter or exit. You need to keep your experienced presence. So you need to make it seem like your presence on the landscape is really minimal if you want to keep deer around there in daylight. And so being a little bit more tactical with your placement, if you want to enjoy the hunting benefits of it, is really important.
I love that. And I think that, we kind of covered some of the things on more of a macro level. Now, you've done this for how many years? And we've talked about it on here quite a bit. It's maybe a different lens to start looking through if you're getting into this. And a lot of our listeners are brand new to this sort of thing. So between the nature friendly efforts out there that you've talked about and some of the mistakes you've made along the way, I appreciate that. Imagine if you could do some timber work out there.
Ugh, I know.
Fire up the saws and just let it go.
I frequently dreamed about, like, is there any way I could wrangle the money and convince the farmer to sell me this place? It'd be cool. I've dreamed about, I've even mapped out, like, oh, I would do this here, and like what I would do with these like 60 acres of fields. Like, how amazing could it be if I could do all this stuff? And to this point, it's just been daydreaming, but you never know.
Yeah, it's all right. You tend to go have fun other places too. So only so much time in the day. But rolling into spring here, you mentioned some of your food plot practices. Anything changing this year for 2025? Anything that you have marked to do differently?
Not dramatic changes, just kind of a little bit of expansion of those same efforts, I think. I'm going to do two things, and as we're talking, I should add a third. Number 3 being I should finally plant some trees. I should just do that. And number 2, I don't know why I'm working backwards from 3 to 1, but number 2, I want to expand. I've been slowly expanding my food plots a little bit more every year. And I'm going to continue pushing one of these out a little bit more. And then 3, I'm going to expand those efforts I described with getting rid of cool season grasses. So I wasn't able to work on all of them. I kind of picked like 2 targeted areas to do that year 1. I'm going to take the second effort. I'm going to readdress the initial zones and try to spot, instead of doing like a full boom spray, I'm going to spot check those spots this time, and then go to this other section and start working that now that I know it works. And hopefully by this year or the following year, I will have been able to address all of those cool season areas. And hopefully have, while it's a limited footprint, it's not nothing. And so continuing to get rid of that stuff and try to improve the diversity of native species out there in these grassy areas, I think is a big win. So those are the 3 things I'm going to be working on this year.
I love that. And kind of, you had to see if it worked too, right? You had to see if your efforts worked with the way and the procedure you did from Dr. Harper. Not that he'd ever steer us wrong. I think that, again, on the macro level, if you had 300 acres doing that sort of practice, how much is that going to benefit? Maybe that's not pulling the deer in front of your tree stand, but you're going to be the outlier in the area if you're running natives. I mean, nobody else is, is really focusing on that as much. So
yeah, that kind of habitat is just so attractive to wildlife. And man, you can feel good about it, knowing that you're going to have great hunting, you're going to have great wildlife viewing, and you're doing something good, and you're leaving it better than you had it when it started. You can put your head down to sleep at night and sleep really sound, I think, if you're doing that kind of work.
Love it, Mark. I'm gonna send you a picture when we're done. I had my 40 acres cut, and I had a drone map made from above. You can tell exactly where my 40 is compared to everybody else's based on the practices that we're talking about. So it's pretty cool trying to be the outlier. One more question for you here before I let you go. I see all the books in the background. Again, you're always putting those up on social media. Besides your own book, what book do you recommend that our listenership take a look at? 1 or 2?
Oh man, I wish I had thought about this ahead of time to make sure I give a good one. I mean, there's the obvious one that I'm sure your listeners have already read, but just you can't not say everyone should read a Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. It's kind of the gospel of wildlife conservation and habitat management. So you got to read that one. Oh gosh, Jared, what's a
Put you on the
good one?
spot.
Yeah. There's so many. I'll tell you one that I like a lot. It's called Wild New World by Dan Flores. He is a natural history historian, I guess, and historian of the West. But he wrote this book called Wild New World, which examines the history of wildlife in America ever since folks came and started peopling North America.
Cool.
And so it examines some of the things that I talked about earlier, but also kind of a lot more of like this interesting dynamic that we have had as we try to share the landscape with these animals. So it's everything from like what happened with the Ice Age critters and the first people here to then what happened as, the North American continent was peopled by native folks and then colonized by folks coming from Europe, and then it discussed kind of the dramatic loss of wildlife populations in the 1800s, and then the kind of realization in the late 1800s, early 1900s of like, oh wow, we can't kill everything because we're actually destroying it all, and then the slow recovery that we've experienced since then, and then it begins to hint a little bit at the end of what my book mostly focuses on, which is what's happening now and in the future. So it really gives you a great backdrop, I think, to what we discussed. And he does it in a way that's really interesting. So that's one of the better kind of primers on where we stand with wildlife here in America from a historical perspective. So I think that's a great place to spend some time this year, and then next year you can check out my new book that'll point you in a direction moving forward.
Awesome, Mark. Yeah, I appreciate that. That'll give me something to catch up on in the meantime, and look forward to talking to you again soon, my friend. Thank you so much for your time today. And any last words?
No, I appreciate having me, Jared. It was a lot of fun, and looking forward to doing it again soon.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for tuning in to the Habitat Podcast. We really do appreciate you guys coming back every week to get this awesome Habitat content. And we would appreciate it if you went to iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to this podcast, and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us continue to grow and trend in the right direction, attract new listeners, and help us provide better content in the future. Guys, we have a website full of resources. We have a blog on the website. We have YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all linked up at habitatpodcast.com. Our land plan services, merchandise, decals, hats, t-shirts, and I give away a free 5-inch decal to anyone who leaves us a review on Apple iTunes. Really appreciate it. I want to thank our partners, Downburst Cedars, Vitalize Seed Company, Morse Nursery, Packer Max Cultipackers, Stealth Outdoors, First Light Latitude Outdoors, United Country Midwest Lifestyle Properties, and Exodus Outdoor Gear. Thanks again, guys. We'll be back next week with another great episode of the Habitat Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.